Hey guys, today we're going to be taking a look at Elden Ring Nightreign on the Intel Arc B580 graphics card. You can see the specs for our B580 over here in GPU-Z, 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 video memory on the 5nm process, and of course just released really recently back in December. We'll be using MSI Afterburner for our monitoring. In Intel graphics software, you can see that rebar is enabled and we are playing on the most up-to-date drivers. And we're pairing with a 9800X 3D and 64 gigabytes of DDR5. Let's hop in. Now, as we begin testing, I'm going to test all resolutions 1080p, 1440p, and 4K at max settings. So max settings here is a custom setting. Maximum settings by default doesn't actually turn everything up all the way. So these are custom max settings, everything highest it can go. The only thing I went in and adjusted was motion blur, turning that off. Now, interestingly enough, and honestly I don't blame them for this, there's actually no ray tracing option like there was in the original Elden Ring. The other thing I do want to mention before we get started is that naturally, as a roguelike kind of game where each run you're coming into contact with different bosses, there will be a bit of variance. So I'll do a run at each resolution. However, there could be some issues where, maybe one run we run into a really graphically demanding boss, and then the next run we don't. So there will be a bit of variance there. And last note here is the game does have a lock of 60 FPS. So because we're locked at 60 FPS, that's what we're going to be hopefully going for and locking ourselves as closely to with our average and 1% lows. So really this will be more of a test of 1% lows and averages, hoping that we're around that 60 FPS mark. Now I have done a bit of testing before recording this video, and this game is not very demanding at all. It's very similar to Elden Ring from what I can tell so far, and Elden Ring on the B580 got us essentially 60 FPS even at 4K. Now, Elden Ring had a lot of very popular mods that allowed you to unlock the FPS, so I may revisit this game on some higher end GPUs and maybe even lower end GPUs to see how high we can get our FPS. However, as a multiplayer title, of course, there is the issue of injecting mods and potentially, coming into issues with like detecting anti-cheat and getting banned and things like that. So those particular mods may not be quite as popular on this particular title as opposed to Elden Ring. But just keep in mind that, 60 FPS, that's what we're going to be going for. And in the future, of course, the game just came out a few hours ago. So in the future, it's very possible that there will be mods that unlock the FPS. We'll just have to kind of come back and revisit that. But for now, we're starting off 1080p at completely max settings at full screen. Even though, I guess one last note, I did test also full screen versus windowed borderless, and there isn't any, from what I can tell, limited testing, but there isn't really any major performance decrease. I was getting the same FPS at full screen as I was windowed borderless, so it's up to you whether or not you want to play it full screen or not. I typically play everything at full screen anyways, especially when I'm testing, because that typically results in the best performance. But a lot of modern games, it doesn't really make a huge difference one way or the other. And starting off here, we'll go ahead and test just the round table hold, and it looks like we are getting a pretty strong 60 FPS. The one thing that Elden Ring does suffer from is shader compilation. So I'm not sure if that's going to be the same in this particular title, but it's kind of funny. It's actually kind of frustrating, to be honest, because games, that require shader compilation and do it in the background while you're in gameplay, they suffer this performance that can just be typically resolved by just kind of like allowing you to preload the shaders. Even something like the Steam Deck, they have shader preloading by default due to the fact that it's on Linux and, runs through a Vulkan API converter. So is a bit of a bummer that, we are in DirectX 12 here and we're suffering kind of a little bit when it comes to our 1% lows. Now 50 is totally fine here in Roundtable Hold. It's a relatively small environment. But this is essentially perfect performance for what you're going to be getting anywhere in this game. And this is kind of what we want to see. Around 50 on our 1% lows, and of course 60 on our average, and our FPS sitting right around 60. So we'll see if this kind of holds true as we actually jump into a match here. All right, coming in, landing in our beginning of our match here, you can see we're getting essentially perfect performance for what you can expect from this game. The other thing to note is our VRAM utilization. We have 12 gigabytes, thankfully on this GPU, but we don't really need it. We're sitting right around 5.5 or so, a little bit less than that, gigabytes. So definitely real strong performance to begin with here. We'll go ahead and begin getting into some combat, see if that changes, but I'm expecting pretty solid performance here at 1080p. And I'll apologize in advance for my performance in this game. While I love Elden Ring, it's not really my strong suit, to be completely honest. But you can see, our GPU utilization is right around 80. Just shows that 1080p is really no challenge whatsoever for this particular card. Not a demanding game by any stretch of the imagination, but it is nice to see that, if you're playing at 1080p, which is really where I would probably, like if you're looking for a budget build, you want a B580, I would go for a 1080p monitor. I think that will give you the best experience. And you can really just kind of jump in, max everything out, don't have to really worry about anything. You're going to be having a solid experience. Now, coming into a boss fight here, we'll see kind of how this handles it. And even with, some of these fire effects and things going on, you can see we're not really dropping from 60 FPS. Pretty solid experience overall here. So staying locked right at 60. Seems like 1080p is really not going to be an issue whatsoever. And while this game does not, have super high GPU demands, I will say it's a really beautiful looking game. Just, it goes to show that art direction and just how the game actually, is built and designed goes a long way, better than a lot of times some of those other games that, rather than, taking time to make a good looking game, they just kind of rely on like some more demanding sort of situation. So it is definitely nice to see that this game looks and runs so well, albeit 1080p locked at 60 FPS. All right, it looks like we might be reaching the end of this particular run here with Red Wolf King Consort here, kind of giving us a bit of issues. But as you can see, our FPS, both our average and our 1% lows, hasn't really changed whatsoever. So confident in saying that 1080p, you can play max settings, no problem whatsoever. All right, so with 1080p being absolutely no problem, we're going to actually stick with the same settings, completely maxed out, but now moving up to 1440p. All right, now at 1440p, remember, this is exactly what we were getting locked at 60 at 1080p, so it's good, promising start here for moving up to 1440p. It doesn't seem like, at least in the roundtable hold, any sort of meaningful difference in our FPS. But we'll see how that holds true, or whether or not it holds true as we actually go into a game. All right, so now moving up to 1440p, we'll begin counting here, where I was testing a little bit before recording, and I did notice that flying in was a bit intensive. So if we're able to fly in and load in everything properly without dipping, it's a really promising sign to start. And as you can see, that's much the case. We're getting exactly the same performance that we were getting, 60 FPS average here. I guess we were getting 55 on our 1% lows at 1080p, whereas now we're getting 54, so maybe a slight difference there, but otherwise essentially just about the same. Now, as you can see, our 1% low is actually quite a bit lower here at 29, as well as our FPS average is just one lower rather than 60. We're sitting at 59. So you see on our frame time graph where we're getting like these intermittent stutters. Now, something like that, I don't know exactly where to attribute that. As you can see, our GPU utilization is still like incredibly low. So it doesn't seem to be like, it shouldn't be really a GPU issue. Of course, this is a multiplayer game, so it could be something as simple as just, the network, kind of the particular match we're in, the people that we're matched up with, maybe that's causing some sort of problem. Not really a noticeably different experience, honestly. It still feels incredibly smooth, despite our 1% low being pretty low at around 29. And you can see even with like a boss fight here, it's not really dropping our FPS really at all, nothing noticeable. So it really looks like we're still going to be sitting right around 60 FPS, if not just, the main issue here is just really those 1% lows being a bit worse with that, like really persistent kind of frame drop that we're seeing there on the frame time graph. I'm not really noticing that frame drop in practice here. It's not super noticeable. In fact, I'm not really noticing it whatsoever. So even after, some pretty intensive scenes, like here's another pretty intensive scene, still holding really strong. So feel confident saying that, around 60 FPS, totally doable, max settings, 1440p. And as far as that stutter goes, that could be a lot of things, but I'd be totally fine just kind of attributing that to maybe some network issue. All right, now the last resolution that we're going to be testing is 4K. We're still sticking with these max custom settings, everything maxed out. So we'll see how this goes. I'm not sure if I'll hit a consistent 60 FPS here, but we'll see. All right, here at 4K now, in the roundtable hold, keep, we're getting not quite 60 FPS right off the bat. So it does seem, as you can see too, our GPU is now being fully utilized. And while we are getting 60 FPS most of the time and a really respectable average, you can see even just walking in and out of some of these scenes, getting into the 40s, so it's not going to be a consistent 60 FPS experience here at max settings. But let's, before we jump into game, you know, it's pretty evident that if we can't even hold 60 FPS all the time here in this, like the base loading area, I forget what this is called, roundtable something. But anyways, it's evident that we're not going to be getting 60 FPS all the time in game. So let's dump down some settings and try to get a 60 FPS consistent experience. And I'm actually going to go straight past maximum and high and go to not low settings, but medium settings. And again, the only thing I'm going to adjust here is just personal preference, turning off motion blur. I imagine most people do that, and regardless, it's not going to make a meaningful impact on your FPS. And as you can see, now with medium settings, we are getting a much better looking 60 FPS lock here at 4K. So, you know, even medium here, Elden Ring, the settings, while they do somewhat affect performance, they don't actually like result in an ugly looking picture. You know, the game is just, the art style and the direction of the game is so strong that even on like slightly lower settings, you're still going to be getting a really good looking image. But let's see if this will hold true as we go ahead and jump into a game. Now, this is the launch day of the game, and we're experiencing some issues with connecting to the servers here. So we'll go ahead and we'll just select single player. I don't know if that's really going to make a big difference in terms of our FPS. Maybe the stuttering issue, I guess that's something that might be worth a more detailed test later. But we're going to be going just for our, you know, our single player experience here, which I heard is not great in this game, but we're just jumping in and benchmarking, so it shouldn't really matter. And here you can see 4K medium settings. Game still looks really great, and as you can see, we're still getting a really solid experience here. Really, you know, I'm noticing like a bit of weirdness with our anti-aliasing. Like if you look at the windows, like the church arches of that church there, as we kind of move back and forth, you see like those lines going up and down. There is some noisiness there. So I wonder if we can at least bump up our anti-aliasing. I know that's a setting in here. I wonder if bumping up the anti-aliasing will at least give us a better looking picture here. So going up to high now, you can see that gets rid of the issue without really affecting our FPS too much to begin with. So I guess these are medium with just a slight touch there of custom settings. And to be honest, you know, Elden Ring is not a demanding game, but it is actually pretty nice that even on a card as cheap as the B580, you can get a 60 FPS experience in a brand new title, especially when 60 FPS is the cap of like what anyone will get before, you know, we start introducing mods, which definitely excited to check that out. I mean, Elden Ring, if you haven't played Elden Ring with mods and with a higher frame rate, it definitely feels pretty incredible. But as you can see, you know, dealing with a small group of enemies, pretty much perfect performance here, locked right at 60 FPS. Our frame time graph actually looks really great here. Now, the only real question is when we start getting some more like intensive effects with like boss battles, is it still going to hold strong? You can see our GPU utilization is all the way down at 78, so it's having absolutely no issue with these medium settings whatsoever. But let's go agitate this guy to see if, and I'll probably die here, which will be the end of our run, but let's see if this actually, you know, makes any sort of difference, some of these more serious effects. It doesn't seem like it. Our GPU utilization is still pretty low at, you know, in the 80s, so it seems like it is able to handle it just fine. And as you can see, even him like swinging his, you know, his weapon around, things like that, not really affecting us in any sort of real meaningful way. Let's try our character ability here. Yep, same thing. Doesn't really make too much of a difference. Let's try our little like firebomb here. Yeah, same thing. I mean, these aren't the most intensive effects that you'll see in this game, but they're enough that if there was going to be some sort of dip, I think we would have seen it by now. And okay, I died there, not to the boss, but to some random guy. So yeah, I mean, 4K is definitely on the table, just so long as you are able to, you know, go down to medium settings. I mean, look at, you know, the game still looks great. Like the textures all look really great. Bumping up that anti-aliasing effectively like gives you such a clean image. So really, you know, I feel like I say it every time I take a look at the B580, but pretty impressed with the performance. We'll have to see how the card actually, you know, like compares to other GPUs around the same price point. I imagine that 60 FPS at 4K is pretty much going to be on the table regardless of the GPU that you select, so long as it's like somewhat modern GPU. As you can see, you know, we have 12 gigabytes, which is really the great thing about the B580, that and the price. But we're not even passing 8 gigabytes, not even really close. So I don't imagine that it's really going to play a factor here, but, you know, we'll see. But regardless, you know, this is obviously a very early look at Elden Ring Nightreign. It's a great looking game and performs like totally great on the B580. Really no problem whatsoever across all different resolutions. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.